Hey, today we're making Youtiao, or the Chinese Fried Doughnut, or the Chinese Fried Breadstick, or the Chinese Oil Stick, or the Chinese Churro, or, you know what? We're making this. We're just making this. As with our previous videos, this is a fruit yeast water recipe, and there's a link in the description box to a more detailed video on fruit yeast water. To start with the recipe, I'm going to first prepare a pre-ferment, which is my Poolish, 100 grams of bread flour and 100 grams of fruit yeast water. We let it rest for at least 10 hours or until its surface looks like this, a slightly concave downward surface. Once we have our Poolish, we can make our final dough. It's really a simple and straightforward dough. Just scrape the Poolish out into a mixing bowl. Then take a whole egg and add it. Then chuck in 10 grams of sugar and 5 grams of salt. Mix it briefly. Continue by adding 90 grams of bread flour and 30 grams of all-purpose flour. I found that this mix of AP flour and bread flour render a nice texture after we fry the youtiao. It's both crisp outside and chewy inside, which is really what we want. When all the ingredients are in, we have two choices here. We can go the route of cold fermentation for about 16 to 20 hours, or we can knead it and have it in 4 hours. For cold fermentation, you can just take the ingredients and mix them up. Scrape it out onto the surface, oil it, wrap it up, then place them in the fridge for, as before, 16 to 20 hours. We need to give them the time to let the gluten structure really develop. So it needs to, in the end, actually pass the window pane test, and 16 to 20 hours is enough for it to do that. If you don't give it this much time, it'll look great and it'll be fine, but until you fry it. When you fry it, it's gonna form these very beautiful large bubbles, and it's gonna be heartbreaking when you see them split because it's not strong enough yet. It doesn't have that gluten structure yet, so make sure to give it the time it needs. As for the kneading, I'm going to bust out my mixer for this. I'm just going to put the bowl in and let it run at a medium-low speed until it looks smooth, elastic, and well combined, and it passes the window pane test. So to do the window pane test, you just need to stretch out a piece of the dough. If you manage to stretch it out until light passes through like a window pane, then you're done, you're good. Just like this. Then we're going to transfer this dough onto a work surface, using oil to prevent it from sticking to our hands and the surface, and then forming it into a smooth, round ball. After that, we'll just plop it into an oiled bowl, then leave it to ferment for 4 hours. We have to do this because this recipe doesn't use any baking soda or baking powder, so the yeast is the only leavening agent, which is why we need to let it rise. Right, here's what the dough looks like after 4 hours of fermentation. It's puffed up and pretty large. Nice. With this, let's prep our work surface with some flour before rolling the dough out onto it. Then try to lightly stretch it and pat it out into a wide rectangle. I'm also using a rolling pin here and being really gentle. We're not trying to degas it at all, we're just trying to stretch it out. So just be gentle and stretch. Once you've got it to a sizable width, we can stop stretching it and start forming our youtiao. Grab your scraper or a knife and cut out about 2 fingers width strips from the dough. When you cut, you should notice that the dough immediately shrinks back like this, and it's very easy to separate. It's magic. Just kidding. It's because we stretched it out properly. It's elasticity. If you're having trouble doing clean and neat cuts, then you may not have stretched the dough out enough before. Once you've cut out all the strips, simply layer one on top of another strip just like this. Then to firmly stick them together and create the youtiao shape, use a chopstick and press down the middle just like this. And if it gets a little bit sticky, then you can add just a little bit of flour. Don't add too much. It might change the color later when you're frying. The chopstick should come out easily. Repeat for the remaining youtiaos, and then we're ready to fry them. We can start by heating the frying oil to 160 to 175 degrees Celsius. This is the perfect range for our youtiaos. I found that at this temperature, they puff up beautifully and when fully fried, have a nice light golden color. I'd really recommend using a thermometer to get to this temperature because it's important to get the right temperature when frying. Too cold and you'll end up with oily youtiaos that might not be very puffy, whereas on the other hand, if the oil is too hot, you would end up with youtiaos that have a burned outer layer and undercooked insides. I'll start by setting the flame to high, and then after it reaches our desired temperature, I'll turn it down to a medium. There's also one more aspect to consider during frying. Your frying pan or wok determines how large of a youtiao you can make. You see, your pan's diameter is your youtiao's maximum length for obvious reasons, so take that into account when cutting your youtiaos. Our pan has a diameter of about 24 centimeters, and we cut our youtiaos out to about 13 to 15 centimeters long. It's a lot shorter than the pan because before frying, we're actually going to stretch the youtiao out by quite a lot. If you have a smaller pan, you may have to adjust accordingly. Normally, for the first round of frying, we use scraps to test out the oil, see if it's the right temperature and all that jazz. Before placing the youtiao into the oil, I'm just going to stretch it out a bit, and I'll explain more on this in a bit. But for now, since we're testing the oil, I'll just cover what you should see, which is a lot of bubbles, and you should hear sizzling. It's also normal for it to sink a little at first and then rise up. If you see things like that, then you're good to go. If you don't see these things, it probably means your oil is too cold. If the scrap youtiao turns brown very quickly and the inside stays undercooked, then the oil is definitely too hot. Adjust the flame as needed for your situation. With that out of the way, let's get into how to properly stretch the youtiaos before frying. By properly stretching out the dough, we can get really long and fluffy youtiaos. One thing to note here is that you should never stretch the youtiao to a point where it tears or breaks. This will ruin the bubbles in the place where it tears and also warp its shape. This is how I normally do it, and also how I drop the dough into the oil without it splashing onto my hands. First, before grabbing the youtiao, make sure to flour your fingers properly. This is to prevent any stickiness because that could actually be dangerous when you're dropping the dough into hot oil. So add as much as necessary to keep it from sticking. Then pick up the youtiao and bring it to the pot. Stretch it out to about 1.5 times its original length, or even up to 2 times its original length if you've got a particularly fat one. Now we can drop it in. This is how I do it. I let the middle hit the oil first and then let go of the sides, immediately moving my hands away. This ensures my hands are far away from any splashes. Once the youtiao is in, we need to flip it back and forth to ensure an even development of puffiness on both sides. This is a pretty big one and it's puffing up magnificently. Once it's turned a golden shade like this, it should take about 3 to 4 minutes, we can take it out of the frying pan. And there you have it, ridiculously beautiful youtiaos, or Chinese fried breadsticks, or Chinese, you know what, no, I'm just gonna eat this. Made them, although they are best fresh, you can store them, and if they go stale, you can pop them into the oven for 5 to 10 minutes at 180 degrees Celsius. Okay, that's it for today. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to give this video a big thumbs up and leave a comment below if you liked it. Bye!